Good evening, delegates. Welcome to the orientation ceremony for the Historic Security Council. Today, Chairperson Aparamita Das will be talking to you about her committee and will be explaining all the details of the committee, procedure-wise, and she will be also explaining all the inner details which she wants you to understand in this committee. There are certain special procedures which applies to this committee with regard to the size of it as well, and she will explain that in absolute detail. Please remember, if you do want to ask questions, you need to be logged in through a Google account or a YouTube account on YouTube. And when you're watching this video, I'm sorry, delegates, you're just facing a technical difficulty. And she will be also explaining all the details which she wants. All right. In any case, delegates. To continue, please remember you can post any comments you want and Aparamita will address it in the video itself. But please remember the scheduled time of this video is from 4:15 to 5:15. So anything you want to be answered within this video itself has to be asked before a period of say 5 o'clock, maximum 5:05. Now understand that she can get back to you even after this, but only by email or say through the Facebook page, or you can contact her personally. So please remember, you can post as many comments as you want. The executive board members are right here and they will get back to you through the video itself. With this, without further ado, I would like to welcome Aparamita to continue with this orientation process.
Delegates, it's a pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the Historic Security Council. Now, the first thing about this committee that you're expected to understand is that it runs in a historic time frame. So we start off committee in 1948 and we continue till maximum 1960 as is mentioned in your study guide. Now, how we accelerate or to the extent to which we accelerate depends entirely on you and how committee proceeds. And moreover, when the question of the study guide arises, we've tried to keep it as short as we can, simply because we believe that a study guide is meant to guide your research and not serve as your research. So, and also we've kept the language as lucid as possible. Now, apart from that, there are also a couple of other things that you need to keep in mind. Whatever happens in a particular time frame, for example, delegates, suppose we're in 1948 and you bring up a report which say is from 1950s. Now, that report will obviously not be considered valid because it's past the certain timeline, right? And okay, so having said that, another important thing about committee is that as committee progresses, we will be, it's an entirely communique-based committee. Since it's a constant crisis committee, we will be giving you constant updates and you're tested less on research and more on how you are able to tackle what is given to you and how you can stand on your feet, right? And think. And more importantly, when it comes to the crisis that we're dealing with, since I've received a couple of questions regarding this before, we start off with the Berlin blockade, but the airlift hasn't happened yet, delegates. I hope, just please keep that in mind. When the airlift happens, the board will notify you. And this is the basic background about committee. Now, I'd like to introduce you to your board members. I'm Aparamita Das, your chairperson. Here is Muskan Sofet, behind the laptop, that's Muskan Sofet, your director. Next to her is Anchita Dasgupta, your rapporteur, and next to her, Madhulika Banerjee, your assistant director. This side is Rana Mukherjee, your other assistant director. Okay. Now, that was a brief introduction. You'll find out more about them in committee. But anyway, so please, delegates, keep sending in your questions. Okay, has the airlift taken place? I've already said that's not taken place. We will, as in when it does take place, we will notify you. Also, delegates, yes, the concept of an accelerated timeline. It is something that I've realized that even experienced delegates aren't being able to quite grasp. See, when you have an accelerated timeline, you cannot determine the pace of acceleration. It depends on the board and it depends on what committee comes up with for a particular issue. So please understand that your communiques or whatever you send into the board cannot possibly determine the rate at which committee proceeds. It's going to be the ultimate decision lies with the board. And if you're sending in communiques regarding events that have happened, my advice would be, please delegates, make it as realistic as you can, because you cannot expect us to possibly allow communiques which talk of tangential things, even though it's a historical committee. Okay, like for example, if you talk of ammunition which could only possibly exist in today's day and age, then we can't accept that kind of a communique. So there are two reasons why we won't accept a communique. Number one, if it's absolutely tangential to reality. Number two, if it is so long that your board can't read it. Okay, because we have a we'll have a time crunch, so you cannot send like a 40-page communique and expect us to go through it, even if it's a soft copy. That is point number two. And another reason why we may not accept a communique is because we feel it's clashing with the flow of debate of committee. Okay, because suppose we are trying to direct debate along a particular line. If we have a communique that will clash with that, we might either reject it, but more probable is that we will keep that communique with us until we find a more suitable time to introduce it. And also, okay, number of authors, usually we have, since it's not such a big committee, we'll keep it to 3 authors. However, the number can be reduced or increased depending on certain things and depending on what kind of paperwork, because here in committee we might have a different kind of, we might ask you for a different kind of paperwork at different times. It might be required, so I mean accordingly, but the standard is 3 authors. And signatories would be as usual 1/10 of committee. So I suppose since there are 20 member nations, so 1/10 of that. Points of order, delegates, we're not having points of orders unless you send it in by chit. Now realize that if you do send it in by chit and it's not an accurate point of order and you keep sending in chits, then it's going to be not only very difficult for the board, but it's something that can make us very agitated. Okay, because we are already, since I've mentioned before that the committee proceeds at a very fast pace, we can't keep entertaining chits which don't make any sense, right? So please try and keep your focus to points of orders which are genuine, which you know are absolutely correct. Okay, about internet in committee, definitely not. About laptops, you can use laptops only provided that they don't have any internet connection. And when you're making and also of course forming of blocks is totally encouraged. You do need to lobby and form blocks, because this is a committee which is based entirely on world politics at a particular time. So yes, if you and okay, another thing is that just because we're a historic committee doesn't mean we'll necessarily change what happened in history. And the aim is not to change what happened in history. The aim is to rebuild along those lines. So now if we are building it the same way, then that's up to you. And if we are not, that's also up to you. And see, everything that you come up with in committee should be backed by a proper reason. Very honestly, I'm not against changing of policies, but any major change or even a minor change must have a valid reason for the change. Okay, there are certain other questions coming in. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Regarding chits, please, if you're like I said, be serious about the chits you send in. Don't already we're facing a time crunch because we'll be accelerating and we have a lot of events which happen along our timeline. So don't send in any chit, whether it's a point of order or whether it's a communique or whether it is anything that does not pertain to committee or that does not make sense. So please try and be as precise as you can. And by precise, I mean genuinely as precise. As you would have noticed, our study guide is precise. I've asked you all to keep your position papers precise. The deadline for your position paper, by the way, is the 14th, beyond which I will not be reading any position paper. Okay. So in terms of procedure, we'll be following regular procedure. Like I said, paperwork might be different, and when and where it is different, we will notify you during committee. However, when it comes to other procedure, like we start with open debate, then we move on to setting agenda, then GSL, then moderated caucuses, they remain the same. Okay. And regarding unmoderated caucuses, the time for an unmoderated caucus, you may always ask for an extension if you find it falling short of how much time you need. Okay. So how exactly will acceleration work? Right. Okay. See, like I said, it's a constant crisis. So it's based entirely on updates. So if we are starting with an accelerated time frame, we will start, as in we'll start in 1948, and then the next update will tell you where we are and when we are. There is no fixed time per se, delegates. It's not like in 1 hour we accelerate 2 months or 3 months. There's nothing like that. It'll be an uneven acceleration. It entirely depends on the flow of committee. It entirely depends on the kind of communiques we receive and the kind of updates we want to give you in committee. Okay, and another very important thing is that your study guide isn't essentially what is going to happen in committee, right? The reason we've given you a timeline of events in your study guide is so that you know what actually happened. Now, that's not necessarily what needs to happen in committee, right? In fact, you can change a lot of things that happened and restructure it and send it in as a communique, if you understand what I mean. And moreover, in terms of countries, all countries are equal. Since when we were preparing the country matrix, we've taken care that all countries are equally involved in the crisis that we have at hand, because this is the time of Cold War. This is the time of proxy politics. So it's the time when it's when people were not only forming blocks, but they were also using those blocks for not only development along the line of say political interaction, but also economic and social interaction. So those things have to be kept in mind when you're coming up with any paperwork, any question, any speech. As is the custom, GSL will be regarding your country policy. We'll GSL will be regarding your country policy, and moderated caucus is depending on the specific subtopics you've chosen to speak on. Any other question? Yeah. Status. Okay, status regarding authorship of observers. Right. See, observers cannot author a paper. Okay, they cannot. Now that it might be seen to be a little unfair, but what we will do is, if you have contributed to a particular paperwork as an observer, we will count that as a +1. Like, for example, suppose standard for a working paper is 3 authors. Suppose. So if there are 3 authors, then and the observer is also taking part, we count the observer as extra, 3 + 1. Now, however, if that does not happen, see, just because it's 3 + 1 doesn't mean you always include an observer in your working paper or whatever other document it is that you're preparing. Because see, what essentially happens here is your observer needs to have it usually makes sense. If you're writing whatever document you're preparing, it has to be related. There has to be a reason why you're making the document. So if you have a good enough reason to author a paper, then it makes sense to author a paper, and by that, all of you will have equal opportunities to author a paper. Okay. Will board introduce the time jumps, or does it depend only on committee and communiques? Board will obviously introduce time jumps, because we are looking towards. See, it's like it. In fact, communiques cannot introduce time jumps. Communiques can only deal with events which are happening along a certain timeline. Like, suppose we are in 1953, then all communiques have to be regarding events happening in 1953 in our current time frame. Yeah. So it'll depend, and it'll also not depend on committee. Like, for example, a delegate cannot stand up and say, delegates were now in 1950 or 1952 or 1953. That depends. A time jump can only be given in the form of an update by the board. Okay. Will the executive board allow change in policy of a country? Like I said, delegates, we will allow change in policy of a country. In fact, I'm pretty open to the idea, but it depends entirely on why you're doing it. See, it's a very risky thing. It's good if you can pull it off, but it's risky because it has to make sense. There has to be a proper logic and reason as to why you're changing country policies. Because a country policy is a very standard thing for a country. It's something that determines a country's interactions with all other nations involved. So it's not something that erratically changes. However, since our committee is a time accelerating committee, there is a reason it might so happen that within maybe 2 hours we skip, say, 2 years, in which case your policy can change slightly. Basically, two things: keep it as realistic as possible, and there should be a proper logic or reason behind having a change in policy. For that matter, major changes in policies may not be entertained at all. Conduct of delegates, right? Okay, yes, that is, I think that's a very important point. Okay, most of the time I'll be moderating, and I'm very, very low on patience. So two things: please don't repeat the same thing over and over again. Second thing, if there is something that I'm asking you in particular not to do, or suppose you are trying to introduce a policy, and you please, before introducing any policy or any major communique, you have to consult the board. If we are asking you to come up and speak to the board, then please do so immediately so that we can move on with committee. So three things basically: do not delay, because like I said, like I keep repeating, we are very short on time, so we can't delay committee at any cost. So whatever you do has to be fast, has to be precise. Two, when you're in committee, please be serious about what you're doing. So basically playing games on your phone or not paying attention to what's happening in committee will ultimately be a loss for you. And three, if, like I said, if I'm asking you to do something, if I'm asking you not to do something rather, please try and adhere to it as much as you can. Number of sponsors for a reso. Okay, I'm really sorry to say this for those who believe there are things like sponsors, there aren't. Okay, so it's basically either you're authoring or you're a signatory. There's nothing as sponsorship. We will not be entertaining anything in between. So if you're and see also a very important difference which I've found that a lot of delegates don't understand. See, an author authors the paper. So whatever has gone into the paper is by the author. That's how the board sees it. So we won't be seeing it as suppose there are 5 or 6 other people helping you. That's not our concern. What we see is the number of authors we have in the author list. That's it. And when it comes to signatories, it does not mean you're supporting the paper or you're not supporting the paper or paperwork, whatever paperwork there is. If you're a signatory to any document, it simply implies that you wish to discuss it. It does not imply that you're in favor of or not in favor of a particular document. So that. And sponsors, no, we will not be having any sponsors of any kind. What is the procedure regarding communiques? Are private communiques allowed? Okay, let me start with what communiques are. Okay, communiques are something like action orders. Okay, so if you're, say, the United States of America and you're sending in a communique, it's something that your government has decided to do, some action that your government is taking. Now it can be political, it can be economic, it can be social, it can be anything, but it's an action that your government is going to take. Another thing, procedure regarding communiques is that we will be entertaining communiques at most times. However, since, like I said, it's a constant crisis, so we will be entertaining communiques. But the problem is that if we see that we are receiving too many communiques which we can't possibly accept at a given time during whatever we might have, if we can't entertain them, then we will ask you to stop for some time before we start communiques again. Okay, so that time there's nothing to get disturbed about. That's just about all. Okay, and is that anything? Okay. Board's view on reports, which are websites accepted. Okay, fine. So basically, see, like I said, reports. All delegates of this committee have to be very, very careful about the reports that they submit. You can't submit reports which are from, like I said, time before or time after actually. So suppose we are in 1962, you can't submit reports from 1991. So you have to make sure your reports are, and also your reports should not be clashing with what we have had in committee. Suppose we moved along a timeline from 1948 to 1955 and we've changed, say, 3 events. Okay, so you cannot submit a report in 1955 which dates back to an event in 1953 which we have changed. Okay, and also you can't make up reports. Like, that's just not allowed. Okay, so only the board can do that. So you can't make up reports, and you can't have reports which obviously clash with what has happened in committee. So it's important that you pay very careful attention to what's happening in committee at all times, to know what kind of reports you can introduce and what kind of reports you can't introduce, especially before, after the timeline and before. This is the one reason because of which we might not accept your report. Okay. Only directives or reso 2. We will have resolution, but that'll be the final. That'll be on the third day of conference. Before that, we will not be. See, delegates, don't come up with paperwork the board is not looking for. It's a waste of time on your part and on our part. So please, whatever, if you want to come up if you have a very important reason for which you want to come up with some kind of paperwork, then approach the board, ask us, and if we allow you to go ahead with the paperwork, then do it. But otherwise, don't come up with paperwork unnecessarily. And when it comes to resolution, like I said, final day and directives, we will, as and when we require, or whenever committee decides to have directives, then we will. In fact, even directives won't have that kind of frequency. Mostly we will be looking for working papers. So that's about all. And okay, and yes, a very important thing is plagiarism. Please understand that we check for plagiarism. Please don't bring up documents from other MUN conferences that you have attended, or documents from any other source which might even remotely be called plagiarized. Whatever you're doing, you have to do it on your own. In fact, our committee gives very little scope for usage of plagiarized documents, because mostly whatever paperwork you will be asked to come up with will be only after a certain period of time in which it's very likely that the course of history would have changed in some way or the other. So yeah, so yes, we'll be encouraging whatever you've written. More importantly, please don't bring pre-written resos or pre-written directives. Whatever you write, it's advisable you write in committee. Please don't bring something from beforehand and then just put in whatever changes happened in committee and present it to us. Okay, because see, documents, if it's a resolution, for example, documents which are too long and too detailed, it's kind of obvious that you could not have come up with such a document in, say, like a period of 10 minutes or 15 minutes, because we can't allot you more time than that to write a resolution or a directive or working paper. So you can't come up with a 80-page document in a certain given time frame. Right. Is there anything else? Will guest delegates participate? Guest delegates participate. That's actually slightly oxymoronic. No, it's that if we require guest delegates to come in and give a speech regarding certain things, then they will. However, that's all. Guest delegates don't really take part per se. Yeah. Can we break the wall via action orders? There is no wall, delegate. That's way past our timeline. So let's just, yeah, the timeline's basically sometime around, like I said, maximum we may accelerate is till 1960s, early 1960s. So yeah, just we're not possibly having, sorry. Okay, what is the difference between open and closed communiques exactly? See, open communiques are something which can also be referred to as public communiques. So the procedure goes this way, that if you send in an open communique, it's something that you want read out to the committee. However, if you send a private or closed communique, it's for the board and the board only. So we go through your communique. However, the board can choose to release this communique to committee as and when we please. So keeping that in mind, you send a closed communique. So that's all. It's just about the timing and nothing more, nothing specific. What about the one? Well, no. No, delegates. No. That's not a valid question. I don't know, if there are no further questions, we'll. Okay, yeah. I've already mentioned how many signatories and authors you'll have. So, yeah. So, okay, fine. So let's just discuss a little more about committee in that case. So, basically, in committee, if you're another thing that I forgot to mention is about chits being sent amongst delegates. Okay, so if you want to communicate, I detest crosstalk in committee. So if you want to communicate with a delegate in committee, please do use chits. You'll have ample number of members of logistics, so they'll help you out with that. And if you have any other discomfort, you can always raise a point of personal privilege and tell the logistics members and they'll help you out. Okay, so yeah, basically about committee, if you have any doubts regarding research, please send them in as soon as you can, because I mean, if the questions aren't coming in by 6:15, there's no way I can answer them now. What I can do is you can later get in touch with me, or you can send us an email on the committee ID and we can reply then. Okay, block policy. Yeah. So basically, the difference between a country policy and a block policy is it's a very major difference actually, because at a certain point in time, as a country, you may have to violate block policy, or you may have to violate country policy for your block. Okay, so suppose I'm just taking a very vague example of country A. In a block A does not necessarily mean that that every portion of your country policy exactly matches your block's policy. However, since you are a part of the block, you may have to agree to certain things that the block is doing, even though it clashes with your country policy. And that is not a bad thing. That's not something that the board will look down upon. It's more like a compromise that you can arrive at, being a country as a part of a block. Okay, so yeah. And delegates, we'll try to keep committee as realistic as possible, because see, it's very possible in historic committees that we come up with such fantastical ideas that you go entirely off track and off reality. So yeah, we'll try and keep it as realistic as possible. So, and delegates, please understand that realistic means that we may have to, despite trying to make it as close to what has happened in the past, we may have to deviate a little. Please understand, for example, the number of members of the Security Council aren't exactly equal to the number of members we have in committee. Now, that is not a bad thing. That is simply because this is a simulated conference, and that was reality. So there is a difference. I mean, I've been quite surprised to see that some of the delegates do not understand this difference. So there's a very marked difference between trying to make a committee real and it being real. Okay, so like for example, membership. Secondly, things like if we have observers in committee, we may not actually be able to have certain observers at all periods of time. It's not part of the time frame entirely. However, please understand that we can't ask a school to step out of committee and stay there until they fit into the timeline. Okay, so these are certain logistical issues. Keeping them in mind, we have simulated committee. And it's expected that the delegates understand this and continue with committee as the committee proceeds. Okay, and yeah. The countries becoming okay. Okay, delegates about countries becoming sovereign. Like I said, that depends. Observers, yeah. So about countries becoming sovereign and them initially being observers, there are certain countries like West Germany and Japan and a couple of others which will not start off as members of committee. However, whether they become members or not in the future, it depends on committee entirely. And if we find at a certain point that it makes absolute sense to have certain members, then we will introduce that accordingly. Not going to favor any particular country, and if you're a minor country. No, delegate, no. Like I said, every country is important. So it doesn't really matter if you are less economically stable or more economically stable, because you're equally involved in the crisis. And see, what gives you a lot of credit as a delegate is if you can get yourself involved in a crisis, even if you're not directly involved. And delegates, because it's constant crisis, will be coming up with a lot of updates about different events that happen in this time frame. And so there is no reason for you to feel that you will not be included in anything at all over 3 days of conference. That's the best part about coming to a constant crisis committee. There's no way you'll be left out, and that too, it's not such a big committee. Yes, also delegates are, I've said this over and over again, but we are starting on the 24th of June. When we start committee on the first day of conference, it will be the 24th of June 1948, and whatever happens thereon. And like I said, we don't need to have a particular, we don't need to be uniform in accelerating. We can accelerate as and when the board feels is necessary. So, yeah. Okay, no, delegates updates will not be only on the second day. It's constant crisis, so updates keep coming. So you'll keep getting updates as and when the board gives you updates. However, sometimes communiques also turn into updates. If we if a certain communique forms a turning point in committee, that becomes an update to committee. So you have to take it like that. And when we're reading out communiques, we can read out once, twice, but not more than that. Like I said, we're trying to look towards reducing as much of wastage of time as we can. And in terms of how the some delegate had asked me what the difference is between the kind of debate that will happen on the second and third day and the first day. If you're a first timer, it's basically that first day debate is likely to go a little slower as compared to second, because the second day will be sorry, yeah, electronic device, delegates, electronic devices are allowed in committee as long as they are not connected to internet. So you can use a laptop to write down your reso. You can use a laptop to, yes, absolutely, yeah. No, which implies that no WhatsApp, no Facebook, nothing. Basically, nothing connected to the internet. If you want, you've downloaded PDFs from before. You want to refer to them. You want to write a reso based on them. Then that is perfectly all right. Otherwise, delegate, there's a high chance. In fact, it's definite that you're going to be debarred if you do. What will be the speed of updates in it? Okay, the speed of updates in a constant crisis committee can never be determined, delegates, because we keep giving you updates. So it can actually, two updates can come almost with a gap of within a gap of 15 minutes. It can come within a gap of half an hour. So, and it can come between a gap. Okay, I'm just, yeah, basically after 45 minutes. So yeah, that's also possible. Mm, later in time country. Okay, if a report has been declassified later in time but is with a country present in that time frame, can they use it? Okay, so see, delegates, like I said, if it's pertinent to committee, maybe yes, because usually these documents are very long. So if you find a particular clause or particular portion of such a document which you find is pertinent to committee, which has been declassified later in time, then yes, if you are past that time frame, suppose this has been declassified in 1950 and we are in 1955, then yes, you can use it. However, like I said, if it's not pertinent, then don't. It has to make sense. It has to make sense with respect to how committee proceeds. Following the current, no, delegates, also very importantly, we won't be following the current UN Charter. We'll be following the first UN Charter, which along with its amendments, and as and when time proceeds, whatever amendment happened in between, we'll incorporate that and follow that charter and that charter only. Yeah. Okay, so delegates. Um, so yeah, what else? Since people seem to be out of questions regarding committee, I suppose you're prepared really well. So okay, delegates. So we'll take a break for about another 7 minutes, and as soon as we are way through, we'll continue with this. Please send in whatever question you have within that time frame, so we can address all those questions before committee begins. Okay. Yes, delegates, we've received a couple of more questions. So, yes. Yes. Can we curb the P5 from exercising their veto under Chapter 6 and under Paragraph 3 of Article 52 of the UN Charter? Okay, delegates, see, this procedure works this way. Okay, unless once we started committee, you can't be using this unless you go back, change the agenda of the committee, and change the agenda to something such that it involves the name of the country involved in the certain crisis or whatever you want to discuss, and then you can stop. But it's on mute. Yeah, okay, fine, sorry. And then you can stop people, then you can stop that particular country from voting for this. Okay, yeah, that is that. And the can the committee time period be extended till after 1960? Yes, it can. Okay, see, it all depends on how committee functions. As I've mentioned before, we will try not to extend the time, because as it is a lot to cover this time period. We still trying to keep conform to reality. But if the delegates feel that we need to at certain point, then we might. Then it depends on what the delegates come up with. For example, if you exhaust the timeline completely, which is absolutely unlikely, however, if you do, then there is a possibility we will extend the timeline. Okay? And okay, what else? Yeah, what are the questions? Is there a limitation on updates, delegates? That is entirely up to your board. It depends on us as to the number of updates we give, how we give, when we give the updates. So that'll be all. And anything? Okay, on the basis of what are delegates debarred? Okay, so any kind of misbehavior, or if you are not listening to your board, if you are being disrespectful to any other speaker, disrespectful to committee, then there are all these are all the reasons why you are going to be debarred from committee. And if you keep repeating the same kind of mistake over and over and over again, then you can be debarred for a longer period of time than you would want. So yeah, that's all about debarring. I'm not really looking forward to having a lot of you debarred. Do we have press releases and presidential statements? Yes, delegate. As soon as a major crisis comes up, you are absolutely allowed to open a special speakers list, which means that you are allowed to give a presidential statement. However, if the crisis or the update is something focused entirely on one country, then it is okay for you for that particular country to stand up and give a presidential statement with prior permission from the board. But if it is something that is a general crisis which involves all or most or quite a lot of the countries, in that case, we will what we're looking towards is that you open or you motion for a special speakers list, which basically means that every speech being made as a part of the special speakers list will be a presidential statement from that particular country. Delegates' motion to entertainment is not going to be entertained. Anything else? Okay, delegate, something that your board members request that I put through to you is that please don't be sexist at any point in time. Whatever point you come up with, make sure it is neutral, and however you say it, it must be as respectful not only to committee but board and everyone present in the room. It should be something that conforms to procedure of committee. Okay. Deviation from block policy, it's something like I've said, that you have to make sure you have a solid reason for deviating from block policy. Generally, deviating from country policy with good reason is not that big a problem. Deviating from block policy is it's not really going to be encouraged by the board. If you deviate a little from your country policy for a particular reason, that is understood if you explain to the board. But if you are deviating from block policy, it has to have a really substantial reason. Can the committee time period be extended? I've answered this before. The committee time period can be extended after 1960 only, depending on how well the delegates use the time frame that we give to them. If they exhaust whatever there is to say, then the board might consider moving forward in time beyond 1960, that is. Okay. Are organizations like NATO and Warsaw Pact already formed, or do the delegates need to send in communiques to form these organizations? Delegates, when we start off committee, none of these organizations have formed. So again, it's up to you. In fact, just for example, if we take the NATO charter, if you form a NATO, if the delegates choose to form a NATO, then it does not have to follow the exact charter of the NATO as is present today. It does not have to include the exact members that is present today. You can include whichever member you feel like. Basically, it's like forming a new pact entirely. Even for that matter, the Warsaw Pact. It's like forming a new policy entirely, forming a new bloc entirely. This has nothing to do with. In fact, you don't even need to. It doesn't need to be named the NATO. It depends entirely on how you choose to form your blocks. So even the name can vary. Okay. Yeah. And then, yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes, that's been explained. Delegates, send in your questions now within the stipulated time, because if you don't, then I won't be having the time to address these questions on the first day of committee, or any of the days of committee for that matter, because we'll be moving fast. We'll have a lot to discuss, and this is probably the last. These are probably the last kind of questions that I can entertain. Is the Chinese war an important part of the? Is the Chinese Civil War an important part of the blockade? Delegates, the Chinese Civil War is not an important part of the blockade, because these are entirely unrelated issues. We will. Yes, delegates, the Chinese Civil War and the blockade are unrelated issues. However, like I said, with progress and time, we will possibly leave the blockade behind or not. Again, that depends on committee. And in that case, we will discuss whatever event crops up in the timeline. Okay. Delegates, representation of East Germany, it has nothing to do with what we have in committee right now. In committee, you have only West Germany as an observer. East Germany is not going to be present in committee. Delegates, West Germany can be present even though it is an observer, because as timeline progresses, West Germany might cease to be an observer. So given that situation, the board thought it was important that we have West Germany in committee, but then again, that will be incorporated in your timeline, and that is not something that you need to be majorly worried about as of present. Country changes in committee. Like I said, that again, as timeline progresses, country change it's something that the board will decide, and it's not likely in a committee like ours. But then again, everything is a possibility in a constant crisis. So accordingly, I've mentioned this before. Date of commencement is the 24th of June, 1948. We begin from there, and then end point committee depends on how much debate the committee indulges in. There are two things here. Anything prior to 24th of June 1948 has happened. There's been no change in the timeline up to 1948. That will definitely be entertained. Post 1948, whatever happens, for example, if we're in 1953 and we haven't discussed an event which has actually happened between 1948 and 1953, it will not be recognized as something that has happened unless a communique be sent to that effect. And if a communique is sent to that effect and it is not clashing with other events that have taken place, then the board might find a suitable time to introduce the communique to committee so that it fits in like that. Okay, but like for example, the board does not expect that you will discuss every single event that has happened in this time frame world over. And for that matter, these events may not even be pertinent to committee. So if they are by chance, and if committee has not discussed these events, then they will definitely be incorporated as a part of committee, given that a delegate sends a communique which is found suitable by the board. How much importance do position papers carry while judging awards? Delegates' position papers should only explain your country policy. So I've told a lot of delegates before that your position paper for my committee should not exceed a page, which is why I'm giving you time to figure out exactly what you as a delegation you as a delegation want to put and include as a part of your position paper, because that is what's going to encompass your country policy. It's going to basically define what you're going to do over 3 days of conference. And delegates, if position papers are not submitted, it's understood that you're not eligible for awards. So if you are submitting a position paper, that makes you eligible for an award. Committee strength is basically 40 delegates or 20 delegations. Since this is a co-delegation, you'll have 2 delegates representing a single country. If you are okay, yes. There are no single awards. It's a delegation award, which is why it is very important that that whatever you do in committee must be as a delegation. If it is seen that one delegate as a part of the delegation is speaking much more than the other, it just goes to show that the delegation isn't working together. So it's important that your board gets the impression that the delegation is functioning as a unit, as a single unit, because it's 2 delegates representing one country. So there should not be any kind of a difference in ideology between you and your co-delegate. It has to come through as a single unified front, which is what makes it more probable for you to get an award in committee, because awards are allotted in that manner. So, okay, delegates, I suppose these are the questions that you've sent in, and I've answered them to the best of my abilities. However, if there are questions remaining, please get in touch with me later or email it to our committee ID. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. About the position papers, please send them in by the 14th. And that'll be all. Thank you so much.